In the winter of 1944 and 45, they had a big meeting in San Francisco that Roosevelt sponsored, President Roosevelt sponsored, in which the old League of Nations was recreated into the United Nations. And the United Nations, Roosevelt considered to be one of his greatest achievements. And at the time that was going on, we were on the staff, and the State Department was charged with the work of preparing the plans for the occupation of Japan, and we were working on the plans for the invasion of Japan. And that's the way the status was when Roosevelt died and Truman took over. He had the United Nations. Roosevelt had left the State Department with the instruction that the United Nations would be in charge of the occupation of Japan just as soon as the State Department was supposed to arrange that, so that the United Nations would be in charge of the occupation of Japan. Our work, our Joint Chiefs of Staff, we were planning the invasion of Japan. And that was our sole responsibility at the time Roosevelt died. But after Truman took over, he found out what had been left to him. It took him quite a while to figure it out because he wasn't briefed ahead of time as to what was going to happen. But when he finally figured it out, he took the planning for the occupation of Japan away from the State Department and turned it back over to us, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I actually did the work for planning the post-war agriculture of Japan as part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, at the same time I was doing that, we had a staff in Washington. Why there's so much confusion now amongst the historians is, while I was preparing the plans was actually carried out, the State Department is making plans for the occupation of Japan, and their ultimate goal was to turn it over to the United Nations. And there's a book I can show you that is written by Johnstone. It's called The Future of Japan. It was put out by the Oxford Press. It was published in 1945. That tells the story of what the State Department planned to do with the government of Japan, which is turn it over to the United Nations. So I have proof of everything I can tell you about this, I have proof of. There's anything that they can argue with me very much about, because the book is there that says that's what is going to happen. And so I can go ahead and write that in my book without any question, because that is what's going to happen. One thing I'm not going to do, I'm not going to write any long treatise about what I think would have happened to the world if Roosevelt had lived, because the occupation of Japan would have been controlled by the United Nations. And what would have happened then, I haven't the slightest idea. I'm not going to even comment on it. And everybody reading my book can have their own opinion as to how the world was changed when Roosevelt died. There's no question of what it changed, because Roosevelt planned to leave the occupation of Japan in the hands of the new United Nations that was just formed. And Truman didn't buy that. Truman let the Joint Chiefs of Staff go ahead and make the plans, and everything we had planned for the occupation of Japan was approved by Truman in July. And this book that this fellow wrote in the year 2000 points that out, and he's got criticized already for that. So I'll be criticized for anything I say, but I've got the book to prove that I'm right. It's Johnstone's book. Proves that I'm right on it. And but I'm not going to say what the world would have looked like today if I'll let everybody make up their own mind about what they think the world would have been like if Roosevelt had lived and the United Nations had had charge of the occupation of Japan. Our objective was to have a friend in the Pacific and not an enemy. And our objective was to completely take the military power away from Japan and redirect all of the Japanese activities, all the energy of the whole country toward the creation of a strong industrial nation. We had an American holding the hand of every Japanese industry. We even had a man by the name of Dempsey that came in, and he was the quality control expert. And so at one time the Japanese goods was considered pretty shoddy and just a bunch of junk. And we made a mistake when the war started because we thought their military was that way, and the military wasn't that way. The military was very good. They had the best rifle and the best plane for that type of fighting. And but we'd miscalculated on account of the fact that most of the stuff coming out of Japan at that time was shoddy. And what I see now is that China is producing this shoddy stuff, but China has capability of outproducing us from a technical standpoint because they're training their young people better right now. It's a matter of time until we'll be faced with the same technological revolution that we were faced with when we recreated Japan. Set Japan up as an efficient country that could compete in the world markets. That was our objective. Every industry in Japan had an American sponsor. That's where we set it up. And the camera industry that they're so well known for was turned over to Bessler of New Jersey. And Bessler had the best equipment.
Go ahead.
And so we didn't try to get Kodak, or didn't try to get any of the stuff that's made cheap in this country to sponsor anything. We had Chrysler go with Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi had the reputation of having they actually were the biggest company in the world, and it was 30% American common stock owned. 30% of the common stock of Mitsubishi was owned by Americans in 1940. That's another story, is how the American industries we actually financed the war with China through common stock that the Americans bought because they're getting better interest in Japan than they were from developing American industries. It was an interesting part of the problem that we were faced at that time. But when it come to post-war Japan, when we had a chance to create a friend or an enemy from now on, I didn't ever want to see any Americans die at the hands of the Japanese, because the Japanese killed my brother in the first battle of the Philippines. And he was an Army captain over there. And along with him, 43 West Point graduates, West Point and Annapolis graduates together. 43 of those people were killed by the Japanese in the first battle of the Philippines. And that was a tremendous loss to the American military effort in the Pacific.